The garage was alive with chaos, metallic clangs, shouting mechanics, the constant hiss of air compressors. It was a place of grease, fire, and unforgiving timelines. In the middle of it all stood Rick, the owner, his arms crossed over his chest and a smug smirk planted firmly on his face. He looked down at a hulking engine block that sat on a rusted workbench, surrounded by exhausted workers. "This thing's junk," Rick scoffed, kicking the steel casing lightly with his boot. 10 years and no one's got it running. Might as well throw it out." Lena stood at the edge of the room, half hidden behind a tall rack of tools. The shadows clung to her like a second skin. She was 17, slight and quiet, her long hair tied back into a practical knot. Her jeans were stained with oil, her hands already calloused like someone twice her age. But she didn't speak, not yet. She just watched. One of the mechanics shook his head. "We've tried everything, Rick. The wiring's a mess, the timing's off, and—" "Excuses," Rick interrupted, then paused when his gaze landed on Lena. His grin widened. "Maybe we're thinking about this the wrong way. Maybe what we need is some fresh eyes. Someone with nothing to lose." The room turned toward Lena. The air shifted, grew heavier. "You," Rick said, pointing at her. "What's your name again?" "Mechanics Kid." Lena didn't move at first, but her voice, soft and steady, cut through the silence. "Lena." Rick chuckled. "Lena. Right. Tell you what, Lena. Since no one else here seems to have a clue, why don't you give it a try? Let's see if Daddy's little girl can do better than the men." A murmur of laughter rippled through the room. Lena felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Her father, Miguel, stepped forward from the back, wiping his hands on a rag, his face hard with quiet fury. "She's just a kid, Rick. Leave her out of this." Rick raised his eyebrows. "She's old enough to loiter in my garage. Maybe she's old enough to earn her keep." Miguel's voice dropped into a warning tone. "Don't." But Lena stepped forward, past her father. Her heart pounded, but her hands didn't tremble. She looked Rick in the eyes. "What's the challenge?" A smirk danced on Rick's lips. "Fix it. By Friday night. Get this relic running, and I'll give you a spot on the team. Fail, and both you and your father pack your bags. No more favors. No more free space." The garage fell silent again. Miguel grabbed her arm. "Lena, don't." She turned to him. "I have to." He stared at her for a long, tense moment. There were 1,000 words behind his eyes, but he said none of them. With a sigh that came from somewhere deep and tired, he let go. Rick clapped once. "Well, there it is. Looks like we've got ourselves a show." Lena walked toward the engine. Her boots echoed against the concrete. She ran her fingers across the cold, dormant machine. It was more than metal and rust, it was a riddle waiting to be solved. As the crowd dispersed, she heard a few mechanics whisper and chuckle. Some pitied her. Others were already betting on her failure. Only Harris, a wiry old man with kind eyes, gave her a subtle nod before returning to his workbench. When the garage cleared out, Lena stood alone beside the machine. The sun dipped lower through the tall windows, casting long golden shadows. Her father hadn't spoken another word to her. But she didn't need his permission anymore. She sat on the stool beside the engine, opened a small worn notebook, and started sketching. Her mind worked in layers. She visualized the engine's anatomy, imagined the path of every wire, every piston, every stubborn bolt. It wasn't just theory. She'd spent years sneaking into the garage at night, taking apart broken drills and abandoned motors while everyone else slept. She never told anyone, not even her father. But the machines understood her, and in return, she understood them. Still, this one was different. It was massive, a hybrid model from a decade ago, and clearly, many had already failed to breathe life into it. She touched the engine gently, almost reverently, like greeting an old, broken friend. As the hours slipped by, the once noisy garage faded into silence. Dust floated in the low light. Lena traced wires, marked faulty connections, and studied worn schematics taped to the side. Her fingers were soon blackened with oil, her jeans darker from new stains, but she felt alive. In the distance, she heard her father's truck start up. He didn't say goodbye. That night, she didn't leave. She wrapped herself in an old flannel she found on a hook and leaned against the workbench, staring at the engine under a hanging light. Her body was tired, but her mind wouldn't rest. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it for me." The engine didn't reply, but something in the air shifted. The scent of old metal and hot oil was strangely comforting. It reminded her of someone, her mother. A ghost of a memory flickered behind her eyes, soft hands guiding hers, laughter echoing under the hum of machinery. She pushed the memory away. She wasn't a child anymore. She had 3 days, an impossible challenge, and the eyes of the garage on her. And she intended to prove every one of them wrong. The next morning, Lena was already back at the bench before the first wrench clinked in the garage. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears but from sleepless determination. The engine stood there like a riddle carved in steel, daring her to try again. She didn't flinch. With her sleeves rolled and her fingers wrapped in electrical tape from the night before, she began where she left off, pulling apart the old ignition system, checking each wire like a detective chasing truth through silence. Miguel watched her from across the room. He hadn't spoken a word to her since the dare, but she could feel his gaze like a weight on her back. He wasn't angry anymore, just afraid. She looked so much like her mother in those moments, kneeling beside an engine, grease smudged across her cheek, brow furrowed in a storm of focus. He had lost his wife to the road, to machines, and now he saw history daring to repeat itself in his daughter's eyes. Lena ignored everything but the engine. She traced every wire, labeled each valve, marked inconsistencies that others had overlooked. It wasn't just broken, it had been patched by too many hands, too many shortcuts that led nowhere. Some of the parts didn't even belong. There was no harmony, only clutter and confusion. Harris came by quietly, placing a chipped mug of black coffee on the bench beside her. "You're not afraid to get dirty," he muttered. She glanced up, offered a small nod. "I've been waiting to." He smiled and left her to it. That small kindness gave her a second wind. Her hands worked faster, her thoughts sharper. She disconnected an assembly panel, paused, then pulled out a corroded sensor, shaking her head. She whispered under her breath, "This doesn't belong here." Whoever last worked on the engine hadn't understood its soul. Later that afternoon, as she wiped sweat from her brow, her fingers found an odd groove near the base of the motor. It was a tiny etching, hard to notice unless you were looking for it. A set of initials. Her breath caught. Lena Morales. Her mother. Suddenly, the past folded into the present. A flickering memory bloomed in her mind. She was 5, sitting cross-legged in the garage, her mother showing her a sketchbook filled with engine designs. Her mother had traced the lines slowly with her finger, explaining how compression ratios worked, how energy moved through metal like blood through veins. At the time, Lena hadn't understood the words, but she had felt the wonder. She remembered one page in particular, an engine that looked almost identical to this one. A modified schematic, full of handwritten notes and corrections. Her mother had drawn it late one night, then kissed Lena on the forehead and whispered, "One day, you'll understand." Now, the weight of those words landed. Her mother had worked on this engine. She had seen its flaws long before anyone else had. Maybe she'd even tried to fix it. But no one listened. Lena stood, heart pounding, and dug through an old drawer near the corner of the garage. She found a dusty folder, her mother's, untouched for years. Inside were loose pages, oil-stained diagrams, sketches written in a looping script. There it was, the same engine but altered, improved. Her mother had figured it out. Her fingers trembled as she laid the diagram beside the engine. Everything clicked. The firing sequence was reversed. The intake valve needed a custom delay. The fuel injector's placement was off by millimeters, but it made all the difference. She stared at the two diagrams, the original and her mother's correction. She saw it, Lena whispered. She saw what no one else did. The next hour passed in silence, but for the sound of tools clicking and clanking. She replaced parts carefully, one at a time, using her mother's notes as a guide. Harris watched from across the room but said nothing. Miguel was gone. As night fell, Lena paused to eat the sandwich someone had left on her bench. She didn't know who, but it warmed her nonetheless. Her body ached, her mind buzzed, but for the first time, she felt closer to her mother than she ever had since her death. The engine had become something else now, not just a challenge, but a bridge between past and present. She took a moment to breathe, leaning back on the stool, fingers curled around a socket wrench. Her gaze drifted up to the ceiling fan spinning slow, rhythmically above. Her mother had died in a collision on a rainy night. She'd been test driving an experimental car she'd helped design. Everyone said it was driver error, but Lena always wondered if they blamed her instead, because she'd begged her mother to stay home that night and read her a story. She hadn't. She went. And she never came back. Miguel never spoke of that day again. He closed the garage to Lena. No more tools. No more sketches. Machines became monsters in his eyes. And for years, Lena let herself believe the same. But now, as the engine began to resemble the one her mother had dreamed, Lena felt something shift. Her hands didn't just move with technical precision, they moved with intention, like music finding its melody after silence. The lights above flickered once as the old fuse box groaned. Lena sighed and packed up for the night. The engine wasn't ready, not yet, but it was closer. She knew where it needed to go. She had the map now. The echoes of doubt were still there, but softer. Her fear was still there too, but something stronger had taken root. As she locked the garage behind her and stepped into the night, the moon high above caught the silver edge of the wrench in her pocket. She didn't look back. Friday was coming fast, and she intended to meet it head-on. The storm came early Thursday morning, pounding the metal roof of the garage like a war drum. Thunder rolled across the sky, vibrating through the concrete floor. The windows fogged from the shift in pressure, casting a dim haze over the tools and machines. Inside, Lena worked with quiet intensity, her jaw tight, her focus unwavering. The rain didn't distract her. Nothing did. She had slept on the bench again, curled up beside the engine like it was a sacred relic. Her body was sore, muscles tight from hours bent over wiring harnesses and rusted bolts, but she didn't complain. She didn't have time to. Miguel arrived before sunrise. He paused in the doorway, watching his daughter bent over the open casing of the engine, her hands deep in a tangle of wires. She didn't hear him at first. Only when he stepped forward did she glance up, her face smudged with grease, eyes burning with tired determination. "You haven't gone home," he said quietly. She shook her head. Didn't want to waste time. He studied her a moment, then looked down at the mess of parts spread across the bench. "You used her notes." She saw everything they didn't. A long silence stretched between them. The storm raged louder. Finally, Miguel nodded, just once. She would have been proud. Lena didn't reply. Her throat tightened, but she didn't let emotion slow her hands. The engine's core wiring had been redone, its faulty parts replaced or repaired. Now she was calibrating the injectors using a tiny digital tuner Harris had given her. The old man sat nearby, sipping coffee, his presence a silent pillar in the growing storm. "She's close," Harris muttered, as if afraid to jinx it. Miguel crossed his arms, eyes narrowing as he examined Lena's work. "There's still a fault in the compression timing. If she doesn't catch it—" "I caught it," Lena interrupted, adjusting a valve with practiced precision. "Cylinder 3 was off by half a degree. I fixed it." Miguel blinked. "You already diagnosed the compression fault?" Lena didn't answer with words. She tapped the sensor output display, showing corrected pressure readings. "It's stable now." For a brief second, the hardened mechanic in Miguel vanished, replaced by something softer. His daughter, his little girl, had outpaced even his expectations. But the garage was not theirs alone. From the front office, Rick stormed in, umbrella dripping, his leather jacket soaked. "Still trying, huh?" he said loudly, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Tick-tock, Lena. Tomorrow's the deadline." He looked over the engine, pretending to understand what he saw. Then he leaned closer, face inches from hers. "You sure you're not just wasting everyone's time?" Lena stood upright, her gaze level. "We'll see." Rick chuckled. "We will." As he turned to leave, he added just loud enough for the others to hear, "Too bad failure runs in the family." Miguel stepped forward, but Lena touched his arm lightly. "Let it go." She wouldn't give Rick the satisfaction of a fight. The rest of the day moved like clockwork. Rain drummed harder, but Lena worked through it all, testing, fine-tuning, cross-referencing every connection with her mother's note. She began replacing the final ignition coil when her hand slipped and caught a sharp edge. Blood welled from her palm. "Damn it," she hissed, pressing a rag to the cut. Miguel moved toward her with the first aid kit, but she waved him off. "It's fine." "It's not," he said, wrapping her hand carefully. "You can't finish if you fall apart." "I won't fall apart," she whispered. "Not now." As the afternoon faded into twilight, Lena lowered the engine back into its frame, the final components now reassembled. A hush fell over the room. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. She turned the key. The first time, the engine coughed, sputtered, then fell silent. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, but she didn't flinch. She adjusted the throttle and tried again. The engine roared. It was rough at first, but then it smoothed into a deep, rhythmic hum. The whole garage seemed to breathe with it. Lena stepped back, heart racing, the sound vibrating in her bones. Harris smiled. "She's alive." Miguel just stared. Pride, disbelief, and something else, grief, mixed on his face. "Your mother would have cried hearing that sound." Lena didn't say anything. She was crying now, silently, tears mixing with the grease on her cheeks. Rick walked back in just in time to hear the engine purr. His smile faded. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "You actually—" Lena cut him off. "No more jokes. No more bets. You said if I fixed it, I get a place here." Rick frowned, as if about to argue, but the look in Miguel's eyes made him think twice. "A deal's a deal," he grunted. "Congratulations. You're on the team." She didn't smile. Not yet. Because this wasn't about Rick or his validation. This was about legacy. About proving that her mother hadn't failed. About proving that she hadn't either. The engine kept humming. Her cut hand throbbed, her shoulders ached, but Lena stood tall, the sound of success filling the space around her. She wasn't a child hiding in shadows anymore. She had stepped into the light and built something impossible. Tomorrow would come with expectations and judgment and maybe more cruelty. But tonight, just for tonight, she had won. The morning sun broke through the rain clouds just as Lena arrived at the garage. The sky was washed clean, painted with streaks of gold and silver, as if the storm had been preparing the world for something new. She stood alone for a moment, her gaze fixed on the garage door, engine keys gripped in her bandaged hand. Her heart beat in rhythm with the silence around her. Today wasn't just Friday, it was the day. Inside, the garage had been cleaned up overnight. The engine Lena had rebuilt sat mounted on a test frame in the center of the room like a monument. Every bolt, every wire had been double-checked. A clean mat lay underneath to catch any leak. It was surrounded by quiet expectation. She wasn't alone for long. People trickled in, workers from the neighboring body shop, old customers, even a local news crew tipped off by Harris. Miguel leaned against the tool wall, arms crossed, his eyes not missing a thing. Harris polished the test console like it was a sacred altar. And Rick, as expected, arrived with swagger and a smug smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, let's see if it really runs," he said loudly, motioning toward the crowd. We've all heard it hum, but can it drive? Can it sustain? That's the real test. Lena nodded once. Then let's test it. A hushed tension spread through the space. Lena climbed into the driver's seat of the attached frame unit. Miguel moved to the console, checking diagnostics one last time. Harris gave her a thumbs up, then stood back. She turned the key. The engine fired up instantly, smoother than it had ever run. The sound echoed through the garage, steady, powerful, alive. Lena adjusted the controls, pushing the throttle gently. The revs rose with perfect rhythm. Diagnostics lit green across the board. She's balanced, Miguel said, almost disbelieving. Lena didn't respond. She was inside the machine now, listening not just with her ears but with memory, instinct, soul. Every vibration spoke to her, every click and pulse was familiar. Rick stepped closer, arms folded. Let's see her under real stress. Lena nodded and engaged the simulated drive. The frame rocked slightly as the wheels spun against resistance pads. The diagnostics held. She increased the pressure, mimicking uphill torque. Still stable. Then she pushed further, engaging peak capacity, a point where most engines would overheat or buckle. The temperature climbed. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Then it plateaued. Controlled. Perfect. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rick looked at the screen. No way. Lena killed the engine and stepped out. That's the engine your team called impossible. Harris grinned wide. And she made it sing. The crowd burst into applause, but Lena barely heard it. Her eyes locked on her father's. Miguel walked toward her slowly, 1,000 words caught in his expression. You didn't just fix it, he said quietly. You understood it. She left me the map, Lena whispered. I just followed it. He placed a hand on her shoulder. No. You built the road yourself. For a long moment, nothing else mattered. Not Rick. Not the crowd. Just a father and daughter standing over the sound of redemption. The years between them, filled with grief and silence, began to fold away. Rick, ever the opportunist, stepped forward, already calculating how to spin the moment. All right, you've proved your point. You've got skill. I'll even give you the team lead on the next custom job. Lena didn't smile. I don't want your job. The room went quiet. I'm not here to be tolerated, she continued. I'm here to build things that matter. On my terms. Rick opened his mouth, but Miguel stepped beside her. Then she'll do it here. With me. Lena turned to her father in surprise. Miguel nodded. I kept this garage closed too long. Time to open it again. Properly. Morales and daughter. A cheer rose from the crowd. Harris whooped loudest of all, practically vibrating with joy. Lena felt something inside her shift, a door unlocking. She thought she'd feel triumphant, proud. But instead, she felt calm. Settled. Like the gears inside her had finally found their fit. After the crowd left and the cameras packed up, she sat outside on the stoop with her father. The sun dipped low on the horizon, the sky now painted in soft orange hues. She held the old wrench her mother had used, the initials still etched faintly into the handle. I used to think fixing something meant making it perfect, she said softly. But maybe it just means making it whole again. Miguel nodded. Machines break. People too. But the ones who rebuild them, they carry the real strength. Lena looked out at the quiet street, engine grease still under her nails, dried blood still staining her wrap. She wasn't just trying to fix an engine. She was trying to build a future. And now, Miguel said, you've picked up where she left off. They sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. The kind that held memory, healing, and hope. The garage lights flickered on behind them. And for the first time in a long time, they both stood up, side by side, ready to walk back in, not as shadows of what was lost, but as builders of what came next.